Yesterday in Israel, it was the day of Holocaust remembrances. It is a very solemn day. And next week, once again, we will have a solemn day of memory for all those who have fallen and been murdered in the struggle for the creation and the survival of Medinat Israel, the Jewish state. So I want to share with you today some thoughts that began to rise within me from yesterday morning through this morning that I'm recording this. And in taking note of what I was remembering, I realized that these are things that I've been writing about and feeling about for a good number of years in various forms of writing, particularly in the form of poetry. So let me begin where this begins. It begins somewhere around 6:30 yesterday morning on the balcony, the 6th floor balcony of a hotel in Netanya, where we were on vacation for a few days. And I was davening. Netanya had not yet basically come awake. The sea was calm. The promenade was calm. All one saw on the promenade were people who were taking their morning run or their morning stroll or their morning walking of the dog. All was quiet. And the day was appropriately quiet because it was Yom HaShoah. It was Memorial Day of the Holocaust. And the siren which marks this and which Israelis stand at attention and silence for 2 minutes of memory, of zikaron, was not to go off for another 3.5 hours. And having finished davening, having finished tefillah, I thought that I might go for a walk and go to a nearby park, which was apposite place to visit on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Memorial Day. And I'll explain why. The park, a few minutes from the hotel, a few minutes from the promenade overlooking the lagoon beach, is a park that has certain aspects of the Russian front in the Second World War, but in the park there is also one particular place that I wanted to be. So I walked to the park. All is quiet, as I said. You can probably find a link to this park on the internet and a link to the particular object that we're going to see and the history of that. But I'm going to describe it. When I come to the park, again, basically empty. There are a few people running in the park, and there are a few people walking. There are even people pushing baby strollers, people walking their dogs, but it's quiet. It's quiet. And there is in the park a railroad car, what we call a freight car. It's reddish hue, it's an old freight car. And this old freight car bears a heavy historical weight. The historical weight of not great significance is that it's built apparently sometimes in the early 20th century, and it was designed to carry cattle off to their slaughter. It was marked as Minkin 12246. That's the number of this freight car. And I guess for a good number of decades, it in fact carried cattle, perhaps other freight. But at a certain point in time, it began to carry a quite different cargo, a human cargo. 100, perhaps more than 100 people being transported across Europe in a freight car built for cattle to slaughter, being transported to the concentration camps, to Auschwitz, to Birkenau, to Mauthausen, to all the concentration camps where Jews were being brought to either be worked to death or burned to death or poisoned to death. And they were transported, locked in cattle cars, locked in this cattle car, number 12246, which now stands in this quiet park in Netanya as a memorial to what was and what shall never be again. What was but shall never be allowed to happen again. If you look at this cattle car, you'll see the door that slid shut where the lock was placed on it, and that slid open at the moment that the destination was reached. And you will note that in various places, small places, there is wood torn out. I imagine that the wood was torn out, either the cattle car was old and wood had torn out, or perhaps some of those 100 people were banging and banging and banging until a little sliver of wood, until a little breath of fresh air came from the outside as the train rolled along. And perhaps as the train was rolling along, perhaps there was somebody standing up and peering out. And what were they seeing? I presume that they were seeing a train ride through parts of Europe. And they saw villages, perhaps a town, many farms, many fields, forests. And I could not help but think that perhaps as the train was passing, the person, the child looking out, saw a farmer plowing his field, saw cattle grazing. But the farmer, who had seen many trains passing, saw nothing strange about this passing. And he just continued to plow his field without a glance sideways to see the passing train. But the person sawing it, seeing this sight, was seeing something. He was seeing something remarkable indeed. And as I was thinking this, I was reminded, what else? I was reminded of course, poetry. And I was reminded of Peter Bruegel's poem, The Fall of Icarus, in which Icarus, having flown too close to the sun, his wings are melted and he falls into the sea. And looking at this beautiful painting, Auden wrote a poem, and it's a poem of the horrors of the human condition, but particularly of the 20th century, particularly, if you will, the Holocaust, about suffering and how it seems to be that we're not, as long as we're not suffering, we're not so moved by the suffering of others. We just go on with our everyday lives. And it's as if it never happened. And Auden, looking at this painting, wrote a poem called Musée des Beaux-Arts about suffering. They were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Anyhow, in a corner, some unruly spot, some untidy spot, where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to shine, as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. The tortured may scream, the smoke may waft, but we have what we have to do. We have what we have to do. We sail on. The train passes and we pay no attention to it. And when the train came to its final destination, and when it did, the doors open finally to fresh air, which will replace the stench of urine, of feces, of decaying flesh of those who have died during this horrendous trip. And what will be revealed will be great darkness without of the smoke, the dark smoke of bodies burning with its dark clouds. And where are these dark clouds? What is the source? Let us speak about a young girl. Perhaps her name, we don't know. So perhaps her name is Rosenwasser. Perhaps her name is Shana Rosenwasser. So, of cats in the chamber. While being gassed in 1943, Shana Rosenwasser had a premonition that she would fail to appear at the ceremony of the Nobel Prize in Physics awarded her in 1998 for her simple, startling solution to Schrodinger's paradox. And yet, it was odd. And in her child's imagination, it was exhilaratingly odd. For even as she choked, for even as she turned bluer than the sky, she knew that had she not been asphyxiated one sunny day after a long train ride, her very first, she never would have solved the riddle. Oh, to be a cat in a box. Oh, to be a Jewish child. In 1998, the Nobel judges declared no winner of the physics prize. Her name, Shana Rosenwasser. And so, we think of those who survived, for sure. But what of those nameless who didn't survive? What of those named, known names of more than 4 million people that we have identified through the records meticulously kept by the Nazis? What might they have become? How they might have discovered discoveries that would have saved humanity, they or their children or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren. Who was in this carriage? Perhaps someone that I speak of every year, who not many people remember, but those who loved him because he did survive and he brought them to life. Moshe Fag. How many Moshe Fags would there have been? And another survivor, someone who actually survived, who has told us this story in agonizing detail and yet in hope of a future. Elie Wiesel, who was on one of those trains and was in Auschwitz and survived. Who else was in this carriage? Perhaps Yankel Burstein. I don't know. The transubstantiation of Yankel Burstein. When Yankel Burstein began his ascent of the chimney to heaven, weighing an emaciated 50 pounds, he wended a winding past brick after brick and wafted into a cold winter wind. Become cloud, he wandered in Wordsworthian loneliness, though Yankel, only 12, could not have pronounced the romantic's name. A child pointed at the white wisp and said snow. But the mother found it in a memory of the child's conception, sweat, liquor, pain, crossing herself, she said, yes, snow. And that is how Yankel Burstein left life one cold day in Majdanek, become a Rorschach test, become a cloud stain. Yes, snow. Yes, snow. And I think of relatives, my relatives, whom I knew only by picture and did not even know his name, who disappeared in the Holocaust. Whether they were murdered in a mass pit outside of Shemeshel in the forest, or found themselves in the end in Auschwitz, in Majdanek, I don't know. I never knew their names. And now, but then I found out. Yizkor. Nameless sisters stared into the future and found only me. One of them was my grandmother, who carried her sisters' names to Berlin, where they are buried with her, who gave the photo to my father, who no longer knew their names, only the place, only Shemeshel, who lies buried in Jerusalem, who gave the photo to me, who knows only the story of not knowing. I have listened to them say, not Shemeshel, bemoaning my Yekishness, pronounce it Pshemeshel, even though you can't speak Yiddish. So when the singer begins the plaintive bells, mein städtele bells, and the survivors begin to weep and cry out, no, sing, say, sing it, Amshinov, Ger, begging him to give momentary name to their memory of beggars and fools, scholars and saints, a yizkar for those who were to wide-eyed children who would have been rebbes, accepting Vittel Pidyon, who would have been physicists, accepting Nobel Prizes, all remembered, all redeemed from verdant meadow graves, from evanescent smoke clouds, and from namelessness. In mein städtele bells, in mein städtele Katz, in mein städtele mir, cry out, Pshemeshel, nameless nephew, mein städtele Pshemeshel, my heim dort wie ich hab meine kindische Jahre verbracht. We were. Today, for the first time, I answered them, Taira, ältere Tantes, I know your names. The Mormons have discovered you. In the virtue of vital statistics, you are now members of their church, Latter-day Saints of retroactive redemption. And so, Engelart sisters, adrift in a fading photo, floating in a bottle on the ocean of time, listen to me now. And then, at the last moment, when future meets past, where memory ends, at the precipice, at the pit, at the entrance to the shower, I call your names and say, my name is David Yechiel for Zev Yechiel, Wolf Ebner, who married Yachid Krab, who birthed Moshe Pshemeshel in 1877 when Franz Josef was emperor, who married your sister Faye. Did you dance at her wedding? Who birthed Eliezer in 1912 in Berlin when Wilhelm was Kaiser? Who fathered me in 1945 in Bradford when Roosevelt was president, who was waiting for God's kingdom, Besoch Yerushalayim Yircha.
and singing to you in a still, small voice, stronger and stronger than the shouted orders and barking dogs and the rattle of guns and roar of furnaces. Pshemishal, mein Städtel Pshemishal. A Jew after all. Irish festive figures and Anical, still doing what Jews do, remembering your names, reciting them in Yizkor, saying, Yizkor Lakim is Nishmas Dodo Sai, Razel Hashem the Lay of a Timer, Blind Blibber and Peril, Charlotte the Middle Solid Fire, Shahal Chuliyah Lama. May we meet when souls and bodies rise from graves and pits, descend from clouds and smoke, to know what happened in the end. I will look for you with this picture. I will call out your names. At the end, the end. And then one day, long after I wrote this poem, I was going to daven Vatikan before sunrise at the Kotel, when Jews from all over Yerushalayim, there's thousands and tens of thousands, come to receive the Torah that will be given to us. And this morning on Har Sinai at the Kotel in Yerushalayim, in the city that we pray, Aparei Sukkot Shalom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spreads out a canopy of peace upon us, upon his entire people, upon Israel, upon Yerushalayim. The following came to me, Ritzonenu, Lirot et Malkeinu, a time to laugh, a time to dance. Under its black satin sheet, the Shavuot sky splits open. The Torah will be given to sunrise God seekers, to dawn mountain climbers, to floods of Jews pouring into a city street. From the four corners of Jerusalem, all rivers run to the sea, from Rechavia and Talbia, from Katamont and San Simon. Rivulets of rabbis rush from Geula. Seminary students spring from Sanhedria. Naaseh doers all, Nishma listeners all, to the Kotel, to the Kotel. A time to weep, a time to mourn in Radin and Vilna, in Lublin and Kovna. Acheinu, Acheinu, Acheinu kol beis Yisrael. In Negev streams of Golos, they flowed to the Umschlagplatz as water spilt upon the ground, lifetimes stuffed into their battered luggage, provisions packed for the great Sudenu, to board a train of dreams that would run on paper tracks to Chaye Adam Street in Jerusalem on this sweet Sivan night when truth makes me free. I bear a dancing dead weight of incredible lightness, a paradox of the apocalypse, of 91 Litvaks, of 54 Yekes, and 62 Galicianers, balanced entirely on my broad back, of Ebners and Engelards, Applebaums and Korbchenskys, whom I will smuggle under my talus past the soldiers of the wall, of air-treading wraiths, laughing and leaping, who whispered to me when boarding my shoulders, Oh, we endured endlessly in one moment more, waiting in perfect faith for a porter of posterity to transport us to a final platform beyond the showering crystals of Zyklon B, far from the sulphurous stream of a chimney, burning unto the heart of heaven, ascending as the smoke of a furnace. We are those smoking specters waiting for flesh of our flesh, for bone of our bone, waiting only for you, David Yechiel, Ebner, only tonight, for it is time. Mountains were born over there. Over there mountains were born of shorn shoes and shorn hair, gold-framed glasses and silverware. Of us nothing is left but our luggage of longing. Zachor al tishkach. Where you go, we will go. Where you lodge, we will lodge. And where you die, we will die. And there shall we be buried. Crossing Chaye Adam Street. And another week, we will remember one more time. Another day of memory. And this was a poem. It's called The 21 Bus. Before there were cell phones, buses were places that Israelis had conversations, loud conversation with. And if you didn't know anybody on the bus, you talked to the person sitting next to you. And I was on the 21 bus on the eve of Memorial Day before Yom HaShoah for those fallen in the battle for the state of Israel. And it was in the year 1992. And the siren went off and the bus stopped and everybody on the bus stood in silence. Yom HaZikaron, Tafshin Nun Beis. Bus rides in Jerusalem are Berlitz cacophonies, are polyglot paeans, hymns heavy with Hebrew, whirlwinds whispering in 70 tongues. Eve of Remembrance Day, survivors of the flood, refugees from Babel, prove life in verbal volume. But Babel is pierced by a siren's cry. How it sent us running last year, counting the seconds from its first blast. We had 90 to get sealed and masked. A discordant note now in speech symphony. The siren warns of an attack of memory. No plastic or tape, no mask or shelter. For protection from the Scud missiles fired to destroy us in 1991. Words now grow weary. Bus and talk stop. Speakers of 70 languages rise, bow their heads, and memory explodes. Of voices no longer heard on buses, over telephones and whispers of lovers before dawn, of mouths filled with earth that Jews may talk tonight on the 21 bus on King David Street in Jerusalem. We speak with them again, yet once more, for a mute minute, in sibilants of silence and labials of loss, the 71st tongue, the language of memory. And so,
one more poem, or one more melody that, according to Mudjitzer tradition, was a melody composed in one of those wagons that left Warsaw to go to Auschwitz, by a great composer of Nigunim. And this nigun, he said, which he composed in the wagon, and people began to sing. He said, if any of you survives and brings this nigun to the Mudjitzer Rebbe, I give you half my share in the world to come. And indeed, it was brought to the Mudjitzer Rebbe. And you all know it. Ani ma'amin, be'emuna sheleimo, bevias HaMashiach, bevias HaMashiach ani ma'amin. And we still sing it, and we still believe. And we still await. And one last story. It's a story about the Sadegara Rebbe. And in the days that there were many Hasidic shtibels in Tel Aviv, and I still remember that, there was a Sadegara shtibel. And the Sadegara Rebbe, I don't remember his name, he would go on Yom HaShoah, he would go to the great synagogue Beit Knesset HaGadol in Tel Aviv, and would daven, would say Hallel with all the other mitpalim, and he said it with great simcha. Right? Afterwards, he would join in the dancing in the streets, clapping hands. The Rebbe felt a special joy. And one day, one of his Hasidim had the audacity to ask him, why does he do that in Yom HaShoah? And this is what the Rebbe of Sadegara said. He said, I was in Vienna in 1938 when the Nazis entered. And the first thing they did was to begin to degrade the Jews. And since I was a Jewish leader, they took me and they made me sweep with a big broom the streets of Vienna. And I had a tefillah, a prayer when that I was doing that. One day I should be able to sweep the street in Eretz Yisrael. And so now, I'll tell you what I do. It's not right. I'm the Rebbe of Sadegara. I can't get up just on any day and sweep the streets. So what I do is, because it was another thing they made me do after I finished sweeping the streets. They made me climb a tall building and put up the Nazi flag. And so I'll tell you what I do. On Yom HaShoah, I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I sweep a street in Tel Aviv, and then I climb to the roof of my house and I put up an Israeli flag, and I turn to the Ribono Shel Olam. As I turn then in Vienna, may I one day put up a flag of our own country in Eretz Yisrael. And now I say, Ribono Shel Olam, you gave me the life to do that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the life and the understanding to come. Me'afela li'ora mishibud L'or Gadol.